Well, good evening and welcome to our September 19th, 2024 week-to-week political roundtable here at Commonwealth Club, World Affairs of California. Quick reminder, if you've got a cell phone, please put it on silent or turn it off. We've had some audio here. I'm John Zipper. I'm your host for Week to Week. I'm also the club's Vice President of Media and Editorial. Very glad to see all of you here in the room, as well as everyone watching and listening online. Now, we're going to get into a lot of politics tonight, but I'm going to start by calling the victor in an election 2 months in advance. And I'm not talking the presidential election. I'm not talking about the San Francisco mayoral race. I mean the gubernatorial race in North Carolina, where you might have seen this Republican nominee, Mark Robinson, who was already in second place to Democrat Josh Stein. He had to deal today with a huge CNN investigative report linking him to lots of comments he left on, let's say, adult websites. The type where unmarried people do married things to each other, sometimes in groups. Also today, it emerged that apparently he had an account on ashleymadison.com. That's a website where married people go to act unmarried. So it's kind of a big controversy there, and all of it would just be a sideshow, except that Robinson has been presenting himself as a good Christian conservative. So, Week to Week is ready to make a call on the North Carolina election. Democrat Josh Stein will win the governor's race. His punishment will be that he's going to be head of a state that still has enough people to make Mark Robinson the nominee for a party. So he'll have to deal with that. Now, I'm pleased to introduce our panelists tonight. Two of them here in the room, one of them joining us virtually from Southern California. Let's start on the far end of the stage with Melissa Cain, attorney and political journalist. You can find her on X or Twitter at Constitution Mel. Welcome back, Melissa.
Sorry, I have this thing now. It's so weird. I'm like, Jolene. Hi.
On the big screen, our first artificial intelligence panelist is Dan Schnur. He's a professor at USC's Annenberg School of Communications and at the University of California, Berkeley, the Institute of Governmental Studies. He's also the host of the Dan Schnur Political Report on Twitter at Dan Schnur. Welcome back, Dan.
Thanks for having me, John. Very bold prediction on the governor's race. Very impressive.
And joining us for the first time is Nina Martin. She's a reporter and editor at Reveal and Mother Jones. You know, they joined. So welcome. Very glad to have you with us, Nina.
Thank you for having me.
Our audience all knows how we do this. There are question cards spread throughout the room. If you have questions, write them down. We'll have people bring them up to me during the program. Pro tip, questions earlier during the program have a better chance of getting asked. Toward the end, of course, we tend to run out of time. So let's move on to our first topic, which is a big one. It's the state of the presidential race. Let's start off by checking in on it. Last week, former President Donald Trump and current Vice President Kamala Harris, of course, met in a debate. Melissa, you hosted our live debate watch party here and analysis. What were your thoughts about it, and what were the audience's thoughts about the
Well,
debate?
many of them are here tonight, so hi, everyone. I live here. They just wheel me out. Here's the thing, though. She didn't get much. I think a lot of people felt like she did much. Well, certainly people here were very enthusiastic about Harris's performance, but she has not gotten a huge bump in the polls. As we talked about a little bit after the debate, and this is the Real Clear Politics average of polls number, just to be clear, it's national polls, so not electoral college. We'll get to that in a second. She was at 1.1% ahead of Trump on the night of the debate. Now they've got her at 1.9% nationwide in the average of polls, so not a huge bump. If you look at over time, if you go to like Nate Silver, the silver bullet, over time, actually the biggest bump she got was at the end. There was something that happened. So RFK drops out, RFK Jr. drops out, and it's the end of the Democratic convention. And those happen, I think, on the same day. She gets a bump then, but since then, nothing has really moved the needle. In the battleground states, Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, the candidates are all within 2 points of each other, which means they're in the margin of error. And for comparison's sake, Hillary Clinton on September 19th, 2016 was up by 3.2 overall. So she was up even higher than what Kamala Harris is today and still lost. So nothing seems to be able, nothing, not even a really, I think, even people on the right were so upset by it that they accused her of having the questions ahead of time. I mean, you did a good job when the other side is claiming that you cheated. So I think even after that performance, it still has not apparently done much to boost the campaign.
Okay. Dan, your thoughts on the debate and the impact, if any?
Well, just a couple of quick ones, John. First of all, we know after having watched almost roughly 60 years of modern era presidential debates that it's almost impossible to win a debate. It's really, really easy to lose one. And generally, when a debate outcome has been decisive, it's not because one candidate has been so extraordinary that they've won over a larger number of voters, but rather because the other candidate said or did something really stupid that the voters thought very poorly of. And what the Harris campaign clearly did going in is they realized that rather than trying to win this debate, we're going to do everything we can. We're going to prepare our candidate to do everything she can to help Donald Trump lose the debate. My own feeling, purely subjective, I can't quantify this, is she was all right. I'd give her a B. And I'd say after about 15 or 20 minutes of the debate, say it was sort of like a football game that was 0-0 at the end of the first quarter. Then Harris gets asked the question about abortion rights, and you could see her gaining confidence. And it gave her the comfort level to begin trolling Trump on the size of his rallies and the criticism of foreign leaders and so on. And that's when he really discombobulated. So Harris, although she didn't move much in the polls, Melissa's exactly right. We're seeing some secondary poll numbers right now, not just head to head, but voters' broader impressions. And what we're now seeing is that from voters who watched the debate, they felt that Harris is more confident than Trump, that she was more in control than he was, and they are more likely to be able to see her as president. That doesn't move head-to-head numbers immediately, but it creates a situation where that can happen. It doesn't mean that it will, and we can talk going forward about what she'll need to do to take advantage of that reappraisal. But underneath those top-level numbers, it actually was a fairly encouraging night for Harris, not because of what she did, but because of what Donald Trump did.
Nina, what were your thoughts about the debate?
I went into it, I think, like a lot of people, feeling deep anxiety all day long. I would say that was pretty much, the way that we are a heavily Slack newsroom at Mother Jones, and I would say that you could sort of feel the anxiety level etching up all the time. And I think that I agree that the first 10 minutes or so, I thought, oh. And then she really found herself, her voice, her confidence as she started talking about abortion and repro rights. And then afterwards, I think, became stronger and stronger. And so I think that I think one of the things that she did was, I think there's a lot of people who don't know her very well, and what they, even after, seeing her it feels like she's overperformed since she became the nominee, essentially the nominee on the 21st of July. But there's always this sort of memory of, she didn't do so well in 2019 and 2020. When is that Kamala Harris going to emerge? And I think that there was a lot of fear that it could emerge opposite Donald Trump, that he was going to do all the stuff that he is known for doing, and she would be a little bit of a deer in the headlight, and she wasn't. And so I think that passing that test was really important. I think that her confidence in speaking about reproductive rights, reproductive justice, really powerful, really from the heart, really scripted but not scripted at all. And I think that was the first time that a lot of people have really seen her talk about it in that way. And I think that was important. The part that really struck me that also was really important was when she was talking about foreign affairs, when she was talking about Putin and Ukraine and, even Afghanistan, and just kind of how she seemed very confident talking about international issues in a way that, again, I think a lot of people are like, well, really, she's going to do that? We sort of expected it of Hillary Clinton because she'd been Secretary of State for 6 or 8 years, but not necessarily of Kamala Harris. And I think she showed that side of herself, and that was also very important. So
let's spend a bit more time on the abortion issue, because you're right. They're leaning. Well, I'm going to say both candidates are really trying to see what they can get on this issue. Obviously, she's leaning in on it, saying that she can, if she's in, she will sign any bill that would restore effectively Roe v. Wade. Trump has seemed caught trying to satisfy both his evangelical base and maybe the more moderate voters and the traditional suburban Republican women, and trying to play both sides of it a bit. How do you, let's start with you, Dan. I mean, what do you make of the way they're both trying to position themselves, and can Trump have it both ways? Can he have his cake and eat it too, if you will, by ameliorating each side's just enough to keep their votes or attract their votes on the topic?
Probably not. You probably can't. But I would say this, even though the polls make it very clear that the economy is the most important issue to the largest number of voters in the country, I would argue, John, that the two issues that are going to decide this election are abortion and immigration. And both candidates have a pronounced advantage on one of those two issues, because just as abortion rights is an issue that unites the Democratic base with the political center, the debate over the U.S.-Mexico border and over broader immigration policy is an issue that unites the Republican base with the center. So think of it this way: the swing voters who will decide this election, only to oversimplify slightly, are pro-choice and pro-wall. And what both Harris and Trump are trying to do as hard as they can is to reassure those centrist voters that they're not bad. They're not that bad on the other side's issue. Harris, of course, is running as a border state prosecutor. She's talking in very aggressive language about what she has done and would do at the border. I think right now that's more effective than Trump's outreach to the center on abortion rights. But, and you know this, John, we've talked about it many times over the years. You don't win an election by convincing voters to change their mind on an issue, because most voters don't.
Right.
You win an election by convincing voters that the issue on which they agree with you is more important than the issue on which they agree with the other candidate. And that's what we're doing now. The contest is for these two candidates to convince those swing voters that their favorite issue is the one that their vote should be cast on.
Melissa, abortion and the presidential race. How do you think it's going to go? Where do you think it's going to go? Who's...
Honestly, and as you mentioned earlier at the debate party, one of the things that came from several members of the audience was a feeling that Donald Trump didn't really know what he was saying about the subject. He kind of went all over, and he was using the wrong terminology with regard to IVF, things like that. It was, and I think even Kamala Harris called his stance insulting to women. And so I think that it is something people, of course, are feeling passionate about, but abortion is not as, for folks who are evangelical, it is not a thing where you can play both sides, right? And so it makes it a little bit different than immigration, even though I agree with everything Dan said, in that you can't, it's not like there's this continuum that you can kind of be on, right? For some folks, like, this is what it is. You need to veto any bill that, will you commit to veto? Like, that's a very specific question you have to be able to answer. And so I think he's actually got the harder sell, especially now. And y'all have seen, I'm sure, the ads that show clips. I mean, they show here in the Bay Area, the clips of Donald Trump saying, I'm super proud that I appointed justices that overturned Roe v. Wade. And those are the clips that we're seeing over and over again, because the internet's forever, and there you go. And so, his opponents, of course, are mining it's not hard to find, but they're mining his prior statements for these things and using them.
Yeah, if the Harris campaign
Yeah.
is advertising in San Francisco, they've got too much money.
They do have all
This
the
is
money.
not a swing city.
John, can I just weigh in really quick
Sure.
on that before Nina talks? Because I think Melissa made a really, really important point. This is a harder issue for Trump to satisfy his base than it is for Harris to do so on border issues. He began posting language about reproductive rights on his website. He began talking about IVF. But when he hinted a week or two ago that he might oppose the Florida ballot initiative, or excuse me, support the Florida ballot initiative that would restore reproductive rights in that state, he heard direct from religious conservatives, we're willing to move to be with you on a lot of things, but not on this one. And he moved back to safer ground immediately.
Yeah.
Nina?
I want to say it's not just abortion. I mean, I think that where there is maybe more give amongst conservatives, even evangelical conservatives, is around all the other parts of reproductive rights besides abortion. So that's where IVF is incredibly important. That's where some conversations that are happening, maybe not at the debate, but definitely in a lot of spaces where both on the repro rights side and on the evangelical side around contraception and whether contraception, to what degree contraception should be regulated or not regulated in some of the same states that are also, obviously targeting abortion, but even and IVF. The other thing that just happened, though, that I think is so there's that. I think there's also Vance. We cannot Vance somehow underscores, puts he underlines and puts asterisks and apostrophe, and sort of exclamation points around what Trump is sort of saying and not saying around abortion rights and repro rights. His views are so extreme and not just the cat lady stuff, although that's obviously deeply offensive, but all of it is the two together. He doesn't moderate, Trump at all on that in that issue. If anything, he just sort of makes Trump seem worse. Like, oh my God, what would happen if Trump, died? We'd have somebody who's so much worse. But the other thing that just has happened, I think is really important, is that in the last couple of days, we've had 2 maternal deaths that were very clearly tied to abortion bans in one state, Georgia, a very important state. And I think that is actually something that people have been knowing was probably happening, and now it actually is happening. It's a little bit of a complicated story because these are women who had medication abortions and they died because they were not able to access care. But it really absolutely shows the stakes of what we're talking about in a new way. And in a place, Georgia, that is incredibly important. And what's happening in Georgia is happening in a lot of other states, Florida, that matter. And so I think that that's also going to shift potentially or harden people's feelings around this issue.
And we talked earlier, someone mentioned the referenda that are going on in other
Yeah.
states. Any thoughts on, could that, obviously you expect that to be I would, especially after what we saw in Wisconsin and Kansas and some other places, I would expect it to be a Democratic draw for voters, but could it also be a draw for obviously the evangelical right, the pro-life right for Republicans? Any thoughts on any races or any states that this might be a particular factor?
Florida's a really hard one because in Florida you have to have 60% of the vote to have a constitutional amendment. I think the most recent polling I saw was that in Florida it's at 55% or 56% with a lot of undecideds. But getting to 60 is going to be really hard. And that's where evangelicals and, are really going to be pushing back. And we're seeing DeSantis do all kinds of things. I think that there's other ballot measures where it's also really important. It's important in New York, actually, believe it or not. There's an ERA measure on the ballot. It's important. Two other, Arizona and Nevada are two other swing states that have ballot measures this election. So, the question, I think, is whether that will translate into Democrat votes sort of down the ballot for Senate or for even president. I don't know that that's the case. You guys probably have a better sense of that.
Was it Kansas that had
First.
Yes, but the Republicans also won.
Right.
So people were going in there and voting in favor of of protecting abortion rights and also voting for Republicans. So it's not, to your point, it's not necessarily a guarantee that you're gonna that they're gonna vote straight down the ticket for Democrats just because abortion is on the ballot as well. So ideally it'll increase turnout, and I think that's the plan. Not to be too cynical, I'm sure people genuinely are. Feel strongly about this, but if you're Arizona and Nevada Democrat, you want to make sure certain things like this are there to kind of help drive some enthusiasm.
There is actually research to back up your assertion on this, Melissa, as Kansas is one of several states, including some very deep red states, that have passed initiatives to protect abortion rights in their state. And what they're finding is that there's relatively low level of correlation between the vote on the initiative and a vote for a Democratic or Republican, or even a pro-choice or pro-life candidate. Obviously, because when you vote for a candidate, even if that's the most important issue to you, it's one of many. And so therefore, it's not an automatic transfer. But from a turnout perspective, you're both absolutely right on that. And what's been interesting is for many years, the pro-life side generally tended to have the motivational advantage in this discussion. And just like so many other things changed in the spring of 2022, ever since then, that motivational advantage has flipped over to the pro-choice advocates.
One thing that's happening that we have reporters at Mother Jones looking at, we haven't published a lot on it yet, though, is that one of the ways that pro-life or anti-abortion organizations and advocates are trying to fight those ballot measures is by arguing that they will increase rights for trans people. So they're using the trans, and it's very much sort of out there, and actually a lot of these ballot measures, but also kind of under the radar, because I think so much of the focus amongst reporters like us has been on the abortion part of it. And I think that there's a certain amount of hope. Whether it's successful or not, we'll see. But certainly, I could imagine in Florida it could be a factor. The bar is so high there, anyways, and DeSantis has made such a strong. Has had such a strong campaign over the last couple of years on anti-LGBTQ messaging and issues. So we'll see.
Well, related to the past debate that we just saw, we have a vice presidential debate coming up. We will again be hosting a watch party here. Melissa will once again be hosting it.
Come on out.
I'd be interested in each of you, just kind of your thoughts on either what to expect or things you'll be watching for from J.D. Vance and Tim Walz.
So I spent the weekend watching debates of J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. You're welcome. So you don't have to. Okay, so here's the thing. I want to, first of all, it is important. I can't say that in previous elections, as nerdy as I am, I've paid that much attention to vice presidential debates. They just aren't really that interesting. But this year, both with the ascent of Vice President Harris and with the sort of grim reality of how dangerous running for president can be, that we have seen now twice, vice president, we need no reminder, is who you pick is very important. And so I think more people will be watching. I hope everyone will come out. So here's the thing. J.D. Vance has said some weird stuff. Okay, I'm just going to say that to put it mildly. And it seems like every day somebody else is finding an old podcast or something where he said something bananas. And so I think that there might be a tendency to think he won't do a good job. But I will tell you, the debate that I watched, he's only run for one office. He ran for Senate in Ohio in 2022, sworn in 2023. So we only have just a little bit. And so I picked the one debate he did against Tim Ryan, who's a Democrat congressman in Ohio. And so he was good. I'm sorry, he really was. When he's got somebody else on stage to fight against, he might not be great in press conferences and other sort of off-the-cuff moments, but when he's got someone to fight against on stage, he really, I thought he was, and maybe my expectations were just really low, but I thought he did a really decent job, especially in dredging up Ryan's record, because Tim Ryan had been a congressman for many years. And so he had his record memorized and just threw it at him over and over again and was really aggressive. Now, Tim Walz, who was in Congress from 2005 to 2018, also has a long record, and then became governor in 2018. So he's also going to be able to mine that for things to sort of get back, to put back on Tim Walz. Now, Walz is interesting because he's great. He's very matter of fact. He's kind. He doesn't call names or ridicule his opponents. I watched 2 debates of his when he was running for governor in 2018 and then again in 2022. And he does have one issue, so I want to kind of dial up your expectations for J.D. Vance, but I also want to dial down a little bit maybe your Tim Walz expectations, because he is, again, comes off as a lovely man, smart, really knows what he's talking about, very matter of fact. But here's something I noticed in both debates. Number one, he was asked specific, very almost simple, I would say, questions and refused to answer them, and sort of did that thing where you talk around him. And normally this is regular politics stuff, right? But this is also the thing that people accuse Kamala Harris of,
right.
And so people were going to notice that. It's going to seem bigger. I think you can bet J.D. Vance is going to go to town on this on the debate stage. So if I'm on Walz's debate prep committee, I'm making sure he's got definitive answers. He also gave several answers that were, as his opponent actually said, word salad. And again, something that Kamala Harris has been accused of. So I think it will seem bigger than it is, and it's going to be something that Vance will absolutely capitalize on. So those are the kinds of dynamics you might see. I mean, these are debates prior. They've got hordes of very smart people coaching them and doing theatrics with them, I'm sure. But those are just some impressions from having sat through 3 hours of this. I know way too much about Minnesota mining issues. So I want you to. So I think it's actually, and I'm not just saying this because I'm hosting the debate watch party. Is going to be a really good debate. I think it's going to be a lot more evenly matched than people might think, as J.D. Vance has sort of become this kind of very strange person in the news. He might actually exceed people's expectations.
Oh, we thank you for your service.
You're welcome. The things I do.
Dan, the vice presidential debate.
So Melissa and I have known each other for many years. I knew that if I waited long enough, she and I would find something on which we weren't in complete agreement. I don't think vice presidential debates matter very much to voters, because I don't think most vice presidential nominees matter very much to most voters. With the exception of Sarah Palin and maybe Tom Eagleton, I can't think of a running mate that had a material effect on an election. And I've been able to win a good amount of money over the years by asking people to name the running mates of defeated presidential candidates, because if they don't go on to be vice president, nobody remembers Tim Kaine for more than a few days after the election is over. That said, and here's where Melissa and I are in agreement.
Good, I was about to unplug you.
Okay, I feel like for the older people in the audience, I feel like Max Headroom. This is really, really disconcerting. But Zipper remembers that. Excellent. Here's what I would say why this debate may be different than most running mate debates on both sides. First of all, despite Trump's continuing assertions that he won the debate, even his own supporters know that's not the case. And what we know is when supporters of a candidate become demoralized, they don't switch over to the other side. They're just less likely to vote. So Vance's job, to some degree, the way that Joe Biden had the same responsibility back in 2012 Vance's job is to remotivate the conservative base. You may remember back in 12 when Obama and Romney debated for the first time, Obama had an off night and Democrats were pretty unhappy and were very discouraged. And Biden came through for them. Vance has a lot of pressure on him. The good news for him is he doesn't have to reach out a centimeter beyond that base. He doesn't have to talk to swing voters for a nanosecond. But if he can reinvigorate the conservative base, he'll have done a good job. And the reason I think that Walz is important, and Melissa's right about his word salad tendencies, is, Harris picked him, for a number of reasons, but the main reason is his ability to reach out to rural voters, where Democrats have really struggled in recent years. The rural-urban divide, of course, is the biggest demographic divide in American politics today. Walz is very skilled to talk to those voters. He won a congressional seat for many years in rural Minnesota. And so even though Minnesota is not in play, if he is able to demonstrate to a national audience, particularly voters in western Wisconsin, in northern Michigan, and in central Pennsylvania, that he understands them, that empathy could be of real benefit to the Democrats in key swing states with voters that Harris might have more trouble reaching on her own.
Thank you, Nina.
I mean, I agree with you both. I think that one thing I feel like we have reached this point in the campaign where there's not much time left. And the first part of the campaign was obviously about introducing both of these people to Americans, right? And I think that I saw Kamala Harris in a couple of, and I've seen Walz as well, kind of, great when he's on message and when he's saying those things that people want him to say about being a coach and being neighbors, good neighbors, and that kind of stuff. But then also sort of becoming kind of a little bit vague and a little bit tired, as they must be incredibly tired, these guys, and Harris as well. And so I do feel like we're kind of at a moment where people want just a little bit more substance from both of them. And so I think that people will be looking for that. And I feel like if he doesn't quite do that, then it will be seen as being a bit of a fail. But will it matter? I don't know. Probably not that much.
Well, I do want to your point about we don't have much time left.
Right.
People think, oh, it's November is election day. As we know here in California, y'all are already getting your voter pamphlets. You're going to get your ballots by October 7th. And we are not the only place in swing states. And I'm going to say Virginia, it's not that swingy, but September 20th is when they start their early voting.
Wow.
And
tomorrow.
yeah. Wisconsin, October 22nd, Michigan, October 26th, North Carolina, October 17th, Georgia, October 15th, Arizona, October 9th, and Nevada, October 19th. So, election day is fixing to happen. And so whatever happens at this debate on October 1, they're only going to have, a very short amount of time to try to fix or emphasize between then and when election days really start.
Play with that a bit, Dan. Who does that help? Does it help one of them more than the other when votes start actually getting cast so far ahead? I would assume whoever's. I mean, it's so narrowly divided. Does one? Is there any game theory to this that kind of sets in, or that any October surprise, if it were something that earth-shattering that would happen in October, would have less impact because a certain number of people would have already voted? Any thoughts?
Well, for many, and this becomes a question of not a campaign's media strategy for interviews and speeches and advertisements and online discussion. This is the ground game. And the side that's better equipped to turn out votes and to knock on doors and to make phone calls and send texts is the one that benefits from this. The irony here is for years, Republicans were more proficient at get out the vote efforts. And that all changed in 2016 when the Republican nominee began warning his party about the dangers of mail voting and early voting. Now, it's often incongruous, but you will see Trump warning about this as a problem at the same time that the Republican Party is talking about the importance of their mail program. It's clear that his advisors remind him very frequently that this is something they need to do. So often Trump will sort of grudgingly say, yeah, and vote by mail, but then he'll forget and he'll go back to warning about the dangers of it. So for a Republican voter, they're hearing mixed messages. And that doesn't guarantee anything because enthusiasm drives a ground game even more than organization. But it is a potential obstacle for Republicans that their candidate isn't always singing from the right songbook on this question.
Any last thoughts?
I think there's what feels really hard about the moment that we're in is that this is all unprecedented, right? We're really in this period, in this moment where what's going on now really hasn't happened before in our lifetimes, at least. And, one of the questions I have is about young people who are so disaffected by Biden and yet are perhaps way less disaffected by Harris, we'll see, but also kind of more conservative, in some places than we expect them to be. I feel like there's a lot of, I don't know we don't know about like that part of all of this. We don't know about what the voter registration is like, who's really going to be likely to be voting in this particular election. I feel like in a lot of places, there's just a lot of uncertainty. And so, yeah, don't have a lot of time, and I guess we're just going to they're going to try to get as many people out as they can if they're Democrats, and even I think if they're Republicans, or at least keep as many people from voting if they're Republican, whatever it is. And yeah, it just feels really harder than it's ever felt to predict, even the years that turned out to be wrong. At least I felt like people were predicting certain things, and this year it just feels very unpredictable.
Yeah, it's kind of a buckle in and
Yeah.
get through it.
Done.
Melissa, you brought up immigration before as one of the big twin issues. Immigration in a rather interesting form came up during the debate, and this was in Trump's claim of Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, allegedly capturing people's pets and making them dinner. Not dinner for the pets, I should clarify. This
That
has
would be
been
awesome.
debunked, okay, in case anyone has it's been debunked multiple times. They found the person who initially posted the message that was interpreted and extrapolated and viralized, if you will. She's apologized, blah, blah, blah. J.D. Vance is running full tilt with this story and such, even though it's his own constituents. So what's your take on that aspect of the immigration? Is that powerful, or is it the kind of thing that blows up in the Republicans' face, or is it the kind of thing that people find that, a lot more people than we thought of are buying into that?
It was a missed opportunity, right, to talk about a real, I think, I'm going to say weakness that's the only word that I can think of right now, on the side of the Democrats. There were plenty of things you could say to Kamala Harris about immigration, but he went with that one.
Yeah.
You're like, really? This is... Because for a lot of folks, they really do want to hear about what the plan is and what are we really dealing with. Instead, we've got everything's fine and they're eating dogs. Like, what about, like, there are a lot of folks in here. And so it's a real missed opportunity to really try to zero in on something, because this thing, you can say, well, that's crazy and it's been debunked, and like we move on, swipe left or whatever. And so that's how it strikes me. However, it is not going to be the Democrats need to come up with something. The strategy so far is not sufficient. Like saying I prosecuted, trans-border drug gangs, that is not what's concerning people, right? It's housing prices, it's unemployment, it's those kind of issues that people can correlate with sort of, and just, generally, what is going on, ness of the whole thing. And so I do think they still have to, at some point, address this. It is a gaping problem, but one that Republicans have blown right past by instead focusing on this lunatic stance.
And Dan, Republicans gave the Harris team another gift by acceding to Donald Trump's urging to kill that immigration bill that had been actually a Republican product. What do you make of the kind of the weird aspects of this angle on immigration and migrants?
Trump convincing congressional Republicans to defeat the border bill is probably the Democrats, not probably, is certainly the Democrats' strongest argument on this issue with swing voters. And I will just say this, for all of Tim Walz's admirable qualities, there's a case to be made that Senator Kelly from Arizona might have been a better running mate for Harris in order to offer her some protection on this issue. That said, while it's weird, and while it's a distraction, and while it's indefensible on its merits, I don't know that this debate over Ohio pets is a gift from Republicans and Democrats, and I'll tell you why. Because going back to what I was saying earlier, if Democrats can make this an issue about abortion, they will win. If Republicans can make this an issue about the border, they will win. And even though it's been handled in a peculiar way, there is a very, very visible debate going on about border and immigration issues because of this. Trump himself said years ago, long before he got into politics, this is in the art of the deal. He basically argued, he said, I'd rather get negative media attention than no media attention. He said, because at least if they're paying attention to me, I can move the debate in my direction. If they're ignoring me, then I'm just left out. So by reminding his base, and we'll go back to what we said earlier, a base that right now is somewhat dispirited by his debate performance, being able to remind them why they like him on these types of issues, not about Ohio pets, but about the border. This could, Melissa's exactly right. There are better ways to raise this issue. But honestly, the more conventional ways of raising this issue would not have gotten nearly as much public and media attention. And so in that sense, the Trump campaign, I would say, doesn't seem all that upset about this. And I think that may be why.
Yeah.
Interesting. Any thoughts?
I think one thing that's interesting about Springfield, is that I have a reporter who lives very nearby. We were talking about this and why, what happened in Springfield, what happened in towns in other towns in Ohio and in the Midwest, and there's a lot of Springfields that have a lot of places that were sort of rural communities, relatively rural communities that were, losing population. People were leaving, and businesses were there. These were places that were attractive to immigrants and maybe to government programs trying to help immigrants from Haiti and other places, in part because there was this falling population. There were jobs. There was the housing prices were actually relatively low in these areas. These are rural areas, right? And so you sort of see the shift of the demographic shift is profound in places that have been mostly white and quite sort of depressed in a lot of ways, and suddenly people are coming in and they're not white and they speak a different language and they put pressure on services and they raise housing prices and et cetera. That's how it feels. And I think that that is kind of a dynamic that is happening in many parts of the Midwest, places that are swingy, and even though Trump being Trump and Vance now being Vance is something that we're sort of normalizing. Oh, there they go again. The underlying sort of social dynamics, not necessarily anger at immigrants, but just kind of recognizing how this really is changing communities in very profound ways, is something that is part of the lived experience for people. And I feel like that's one of those things that we haven't really measured fully because there's so much noise, but it could be a very real factor in whether somebody decides that who they want to vote for.
John, can I add on to Nicole's point, because it's a really smart one. I just want to quantify it a little bit, not just in small town America, but more broadly. We know from looking back at over a century, at 120 years of data, that when the percentage of the nation's population I'll say this another way, when the percentage of the nation's population rises to over 11% that were not born in this country, almost predictably, you begin to see the issue of immigration emerge as a political issue. And this has happened going back to the Irish and the Italians. And it's a very specific data point. We're in the 12 or 13% range now. And this is absolutely historically predictable. This is the way people react, sometimes for the good, sometimes for the bad. But when you reach a certain threshold, this is what voters start thinking about more than they do, understandably, under other circumstances.
Someone in the audience writes, economists appear to believe that the U.S. economy is as strong as it is because of immigration. Any comments? Anybody?
That's exactly right.
Everything's a trade-off, right? I mean, it's as strong as it is, but it also can drive up housing prices. It also, I think the Fed chair just said also it's contributed to some unemployment.
Right.
And so, I mean, it depends on what do you mean by good for the economy? And I just mean when I talk about Democrats, what I'm saying is, hey, you screwed us out of this immigration bill is not a policy, right? Like that's not telling people what you're going to do or what you think about this or what you think is working or not working. They need to do better than just say you ruined our big chance. We need more specifics around that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me, John, elaborate on they are right. In the developed world, we are seeing a graying population. More and more older people being supported by fewer and fewer younger people. And not only does that mean fewer taxpayers to fund services for seniors, it means fewer people to fill the available jobs. We saw this first in Japan. Now it's pervasive in Western Europe. It's something that is causing a huge challenge in China. And the only reason that's not happening in the United States is because of the flow of migrants from other parts of the world into this country. Melissa's exactly right. Again, that there are certainly costs that come with it. But at the most basic level, shutting down migration causes labor shortages. It means fewer taxpayers for services, particularly for seniors. And because of the labor shortage, it means higher inflation.
Right.
That's not an argument that Harris and the Democrats can make on the stump for all the reasons we've been talking about for the last 40 minutes. But the fact of the matter is, if you have a system that's regulated, it is beneficial to the economy. And I think most Americans, as stringent and as restrictions they become on border issues, polls also show that they're very, very supportive of pathways to legalization and pathways to citizenship. So maybe the thing to do is to think about this broader issue. Just like Nina earlier said, we couldn't just talk about abortion and the reproductive discussion.
Right.
Maybe we think about the border and migration policy as two separate aspects of the same issue. And Americans are very restrictionist at the border and very supportive once an individual or their family has arrived here.
Well, I think, and you're absolutely right. I think, but polls also show, I mean, this, for example, there was a big Wall Street Journal article about this, this the way that immigrants help the U.S. economy recently. But the problem with the article was that it didn't make any distinction between people who were here lawfully and people who are not. And I think that for a lot of folks, that's an important distinction, and it might not be for an economist, but I think the reason why people can hold what seem to be opposite ideas is because, you can be pro-legal immigration and say, great, let's go through the process, how Byzantine as it is, and maybe it should be changed. But it can't be, it's not a policy to say, if you can somehow make it, you're good. Like that's not how a nation can work. And I think people understand that. And that's why it seems like they're holding contradictory opinions when you poll them about pathways to citizenship and legal migration versus what seems to be a less controlled situation at the border.
Another question from the audience. Democrats have been doing better in off-season elections or off-year elections than the polls have indicated. Why is this, and do you see this as a trend for the November election? I think, Nina, you mentioned how it's kind of difficult to figure out who is going to be turning out in this.
Right. I think probably Dan knows the details of polls and so forth and what the dynamics are better than I do. But that certainly does seem to be true. And recently, it has certainly seemed to be related, I would say, since 2022 to abortion and reproductive rights. So I think that, a lot of people predicted, for example, that I guess it's an off year, it was a midterm election, 2022, that it was going to go much worse than it ended up going for the Democrats, much better for the Republicans. I mean, they took the House back, but not the Senate, and actually strengthened their hold on in some states, I think. And so I think that that's one of those things that we haven't quite been able to measure. I also feel like every time every time there's been an election since 2022, it feels like since Roe was overturned in June of 2022, it feels like there's been surprise at the extent to which policies favored traditionally by Democrats, sometimes actual Democratic candidates, have done relative to what they had done in the past or what people were expecting. And I think a lot of that is about abortion, but this is the first time we've seen it in a presidential election in this way, and I don't know that it's going to necessarily, we'll see. That's the hope if you're a Democrat, and that's the fear if you're a Republican. I think a lot of it really does have to do with women and young women and abortion.
And maybe the fact that some pollsters need to change their assumptions.
Right, exactly, about who's right, exactly.
Yeah, Melissa and I interviewed Jonathan Brown. He's been doing the Chronicles mayoral polling. And we asked him at one point, or you asked him kind of like, how confident are you in the way polling is done these days and the assumptions on who's actually going to vote the way that that you're telling? And one of the things he said was that, and this is a wild paraphrase, I don't remember exactly, but it was something to the effect of Donald Trump was a huge problem because a lot of his voters are less likely to answer a poll, especially a random phone call. And then there was also kind of under-reporting of their willingness to vote for, willing to tell a pollster that they were voting for Trump, but they were voting for Trump. So,
John, I wasn't part of that discussion, and I have nothing but respect for Jonathan, but I'd push back on that a little bit.
Please.
We learned a long time ago that when people are polled on the telephone, they do tell pollsters what they think the pollster wants to hear.
Really?
We called that the Bradley effect, going all the way back to 1982, when a lot of Californians told pollsters that they would be willing to vote for an African American for governor when they were not. We learned years ago that if you poll online, that goes away. People feel the need to impress an unseen phone caller, but they don't feel the need to impress an algorithm or a checkbox. So you can control for that pretty easily. What really did it, I think, for the Trump voters is for many, many years, education level was not considered a reliable indicator of partisan behavior. We relied on income. We relied on ethnicity.
Okay.
But in the Trump era, all of a sudden we began to see high school graduates voting heavily Republican and college graduates going vote much more Democrat. And the pollsters just simply hadn't adjusted for that. Real quick, back to the original question. And I think Nina is exactly right about it. What I would say about off-year elections or midterm elections, John, at least since 2016, is Donald Trump is an incredibly unique and incredibly powerful political force.
Okay.
And his political benefits are not transferable. So when he's on the ballot, there's a lot of conservatives who turn out that no matter how much he campaigns for candidates for Senate and governor and House, they simply don't transfer that affection. Whereas the animosity that Trump's enemies feel toward him is very easily transferable down ballot for all the predictable reasons.
Good point. Some question from the audience asking for your thoughts on potential for political violence after the election. Obviously on the assumption that Trump would lose, but either way, maybe.
There's been polling done on this over the last couple of years, and it shows somewhat disturbingly that depending on the poll, between 17 or 18 and 23 or 24% of Americans do think that violence is justified in order to prevent their opponents from taking over the system. And what I will say is, depending on the poll, sometimes those numbers are higher among Republicans, sometimes among Democrats. Taking them as a whole, there's not a considered edge for one party or the other, but the seemingly roughly equal number of zealots in both parties who do think it's justified. And the fact that a couple of them have gotten guns in the last few weeks is disturbing, but shouldn't be surprising.
Melissa?
So one year when I was a reporter, I covered the voting of the electors in Sacramento. And it's just this, like, I think it was a Saturday. They all came down, and it's all the nameless people who pledged, to vote for Joe Biden. And so they show up, and they, it's a very informal thing. Everyone just you just walk in, and there it is, and they do a little sort of ceremony, and they vote, and that's it.
Coffee and donuts in the back?
I mean, it's really, but to your point, to Dan's point, I suspect if you or I went down to the state capitol on the day that the electors are going to vote, and let's face it, we know how they're going to vote. And in other state houses across the nation, there's going to be guards there, right? You're not going to be able to just walk in and watch this, this moment happen, this process happen. That it will be the kind of thing that everyone's taking a lot more precautions around. And so it's sad that it is now a thing that's on the table. Right, it's not a thing that's unthinkable anymore. It's a thing that you go, okay, of the things that could potentially happen, that is one of them, and you have to sort of plan accordingly. And it's very sad.
Nina, any thoughts? Violence?
Yes. I think I suspect you're right that there will be more precautions in all the obvious places, and the fear is that there'll be fewer precautions in places that people aren't thinking about, and it's terrifying to think that we would go through a January 6th again. But I guess not. It would be different. I would think it would be different if something happened. But it's also not unthinkable anymore, and that's what is that's also terrifying.
Yeah. Dan?
I guess.
Yes, the very thin silver lining I'll offer in this, because I think we've all made it pretty clear how we feel about this and our concerns about it, is it does appear, these two recent attempts on Trump notwithstanding, it does appear that the security and election infrastructure is much better prepared for this type of uprising than they were 4 years ago. 4 years ago, anybody who knew anything about this dismissed the possibility. You actually saw Trump White House officials saying, oh, let him rage for a couple of weeks, then he'll go back to Mar-a-Lago and it'll be all gone. And if you listen to Christopher Wray, the director of the FBI, if you listen to local law enforcement, if you listen to election officials, it doesn't protect against this from happening, but they're more aware and they're making more of an effort to prepare. And I take some encouragement from that.
Okay. Any thoughts? Okay. Someone asks about Project 2025. We've been hearing about this for a while. Do you think that's something that is a vote getter, or is just kind of the noise of the election? I mean, how seriously do we have any polling on whether people are actually paying attention to that and that it matters to them?
I was wrong about this. I thought when I saw the Democrats beginning to make a big deal out of something called Project 2025, I thought it was going to be an inside the Beltway political insider type of discussion. But polling does show that, at least for me, a surprisingly large number of voters have heard of it, are aware of it, and have concerns about it. It's turned into a very effective political weapon for the Democrats.
Yeah, I think Project 2025 combined with JD Vance has been, it kind of, they work together very well or very scarily, depending on your point of view. But I do think that there's something about Vance that kind of underscores a book, like a 900-page book, like really? No, is it, with all those policies, but to kind of see some of those ideas and policies embodied in a vice presidential candidate and actually have him double down on some of the ideas in that are in Project 2025 with a mic around or sort of, it's sobering. And I do think that it seems to have worked with a lot of people. Surprisingly, young people know about Project 2025 more than I would have thought they would.
In the debate, Kamala Harris, sort of tied Donald Trump to Project 2025. And he said, I don't know anything about that. I haven't read it. And I believe that. I was like, yeah, no, he hasn't. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Before we get to the news quiz, last topic, I just want to briefly get into California. I mean, you notice we don't spend a lot of time talking about the Adam Schiff, Steve Garvey race. Does anyone think Steve Garvey is going to win this? I'm not saying this as an insult or criticism of the Republicans.
Wait, my blue scribbles on the back of this.
Yeah.
Steve Garvey, this is a PPIC poll. Steve Garvey, 35. Adam Schiff, 63.
Okay. Wow.
Undecided, 1. Which was
Okay.
really surprising.
This means that Mark Robinson has a better chance of becoming North Carolina's governor than Steve Garvey does. I think that says more about North Carolina.
I would say let's be fair about this, John. Adam Schiff probably can't hit a ball out of Dodger Stadium, and Steve Garvey can't get elected to the United States Senate. So they both have something.
It's a draw. It's a draw. Okay. And any thoughts on what Gavin Newsom is going to be doing after he leaves? I mean, assuming, say, Vice President Harris wins, I'm not calling that election. It is way too close and way too complicated. But if she were to get in, does Newsom have another job, or does he go back to Plumpjack Winery or whatever?
I was watching the Emmys the other night. Shogun did really well, and I was thinking about Gavin Newsom because in Shogun the main character, I'm not giving anything away, keeps saying he doesn't want to be Shogun, right? He's like, no. Tokugawa. He keeps saying, oh no, I don't want to be Shogun, but if you insist, and it reminded me of Gavin Newsom. Like, oh no, I'm Biden all the way. Okay, so my first thought was maybe he'll want something high up in the administration, but if you look at what happened at the DNC, where he didn't even get to speak, except to announce California's votes, like that was it, then it seems like the Harris campaign is keeping. I was joking backstage. I was like, at your wedding, you keep like the pretty girl off the stage with you. You don't want her to be a bridesmaid. You want to keep her in the audience. And it seemed like it was here's this person. He's Californian. He's very similar in a lot of ways to Kamala Harris. Keep him far away. So I'm guessing maybe an ambassadorship. Maybe like, why don't you go on over to France or Luxembourg or... Pick one. Just go.
Yeah, Gavin Newsom couldn't get France if his life depended on it. I will offer you this. First of all, I think most importantly, Gavin Newsom has time. Think of it this way. In 2052, Gavin Newsom will be younger than Joe Biden is today.
Wow.
So it's not like there's any rush here.
Okay.
Second, if Trump were to win, Newsom would be in New Hampshire and South Carolina by the following weekend. If Harris wins, my thinking on this, and this is not a criticism of Newsom, not at all, but I don't see the political benefit that the Harris White House gets from appointing him to a prominent position. So he doesn't get France. He doesn't get India the way Eric Garcetti did. Micronesia, maybe. And then I think the last thing, but far more important and more immediate about Gavin Newsom, for those of you who have not yet seen the news, today our governor announced that he did not have time to campaign against Proposition 36. He said he's trying to get Kamala Harris elected. He's got 900 bills to decide. He clearly saw the poll this morning that showed 36 winning by an astronomical margin. But for the governor, who has been such a strong voice against that brand of criminal justice reform, to 7 weeks before the election saying, sorry, I'm too busy, that's extraordinary.
We were thinking one option might also be to Buttigieg him, which means, which is a thing where you take someone who is an up-and-coming political person and you put them in charge of a department like the Department of Transportation that is completely unwieldy and no one can ever really be successful running it. And you sort of bury them in that sort of bureaucracy. Now, we were saying he might not take something like that. He may not want to sort of report to Kamala Harris in that way, but that's another option in addition to sending him to some place far flung. But I got to believe something happened there because he aside from like a little bit of a blurb on Pod Save America, he was really nice and didn't raise hell when everybody just sort of shifted right over to Kamala Harris and said nothing to see here. And he was like, oh, okay, great. So there goes my thing for the next 10 years. Great. I'll smile and go Harris. Like that in exchange for his unwavering support for Harris, so much so that he can't even campaign.
Right.
Prop 36, that he is expecting something from this administration if she were to win. I don't know what that is. Maybe Luxembourg, maybe Department of Transportation. But there are different ways to bury your, potential future, scene stealers.
Yeah.
When is the next election for Marin County Supervisor?
Okay, Nina, you get the last word.
My prediction is, I was thinking homelessness czar, maybe.
Own that.
Something like that.
Well, listen, we've come to the end of our program. I want to thank Nina Martin Danchner and Melissa Kane. And for all of you here in the room, everyone watching and listening online, thank you. Have a great weekend. Stay informed and active, including voting. And we'll see you again soon. Good night.